Greetings, Kim Lincoln here, and I'm here with a colleague, Beth Brown, and we're going to be discussing some of the points in my book, Wholly Here, Wholly You, Discovering Your Authentic Self. So Beth, hi, greetings.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
Good to be with you too.
Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
We're so glad you could put some of that down in writing for all of us.
Great. So, I've been curious. I've known you for quite some time. I'm wondering how this work has affected your life.
So, we're all so grateful that you've put down in writing some of the things that I've learned from you. But I think when I came to your ideas and your approach to things, it pulled together fragments from other kinds of practices that I use, either working with groups or with individuals in organizational development. But the very simple change for me was that I think I came from a background of no strain, no pain, no gain. So even in trying to bring about change individually or in groups, it seemed to be an issue of working at it harder, or if you just tried harder, you had more self-discipline, that would yield change. So I came from an athletic background. And I think the real change for me was the perspective that the surrender and the actual acceptance of things as they are, as imperfect as they might be, actually leads to the resolution and the progress that you want in the way that you've laid things out. Sort of the mechanism of what brings about change is different. It's like a missing step that I didn't have in the past. That changed my perspective on its head.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, what is it that would be different?
For me personally, I struggled with sort of reactivity, and so self-discipline and kind of trying to contain frustration or other negative emotions was very different than your process of actually allowing them to be right in front of me.
Right. Take
Responsibility for not acting them out, of course, but to feel them energetically through my body at the time that they occur and actually observe it and allow it to have its full force.
Right.
Then see where that takes you. Was completely different from kind of trying to control yourself and sit up straight and be polite and smile and the forcing of being composed, as opposed to actually so public speaking, for instance, the fear of public speaking and getting up and feeling that anxiety. Now that I have this methodology in my toolkit, I think more about allowing the fear to be present and let it be there, and then it does dissipate in a different way, so that the next time I'm in a setting like that, I actually have more capacity than I had the last time. Where I think in the past it was sort of there was more effort involved, and that effort itself was exhausting.
Right.
And this is not exhausting.
Right.
I'm sure that it sounds the same, but it revolutionized the way I approach kind of trying to improve myself or improve the functioning of groups or understand someone else's behavior. It's very different perspective.
Totally. It's the difference between what I talk about in the book, between splitting something off or creating separation, either by repressing a feeling or denying, or not even conscious, and we feel a charge and we act out not even knowing why or what's up.
I think the first thing that I learned from you, what did splitting mean when you used that language when I first met you? So splitting off, so you think of, personalities and things like that.
Right.
So, until you get to understand this. But if
Yeah.
the basic framework is that there's an essential self that we all have, kind of our better self, and the one that has a lot of resilience, and then there's the part of us that has reacted to the pressures we've been under, the environment we've grown up in, the stress that's around us, sort of the reactive self,
Right.
knowing that there's a home base and
Right.
that there's a split between the home base and my behavior and my reaction to the world. That was new for me to understand. That's the split. The split is between my sort of God-given self and the resilient self, which is there for all of us,
Right.
and what we've learned to do with all these other tools that we've developed with our egos. So I guess, another way to think of it is, in the past, I would think that split off self, the ego self, just needed to work harder.
Right.
And I wasn't really turning around and realizing that I had my own gold mine in my own personality structure.
Wow.
Available to me at all times. So it's not something out there.
And you said something really important here in my personal structure, my personality, which is the personal I. If we try to kill the ego and get rid of it, we're in big trouble, because the personality is what helps walk us through everyday mundane life. And so this work, I feel one of the differences is we're not killing and getting rid of the ego, even though it may feel terrifying, almost like a death. But what's really happening is a whole reorientation to who we truly are. So the ego then comes into direct alignment or synergy, my words, with our authentic self, with our essential self.
Right, so the authentic self and the kind of ego-driven self that's, functioning out of practical need,
Right.
the way it does. The other thing that was new about your work, which, we all talk about it, kind of the witness that, you have to have a capacity for insight to make progress.
Right.
But to say that the witness isn't just minding that ego-driven self and trying to correct its behavior, like
Right.
well, I had a critical view of those kinds of things. So that athletic,
Right.
kind of mentality to fix it. This work invited me to say there's two places to look. There's
Right.
my essential or authentic self, and then there's, the self that is operating in the world, and there's a gap between the two, and it's that witness that's actually looking at both sides at the same time. When you say you want everything to be present, it's basically, we're very, aware of our behavior in the world and the way we interact under stress and that kind of thing, but we don't often realize what's happening back at our home base. So I think the
Right.
third part that I learned was how to use that witness function to be aware of both parts of myself at the same time, which, makes life much more interesting,
Yeah.
than just continually, acting out. It's very simple, but it's a different way of observing yourself and looking for all the clues about what's happening and how can you actually make progress based on what just happened. How can that be a lesson that actually integrates more parts of yourself as you become more aware and then have more capacity to be wholly here.
Right.
Be all of you here at one time.
Truly. Because what you're talking about here is the difference between early unconscious learned patterns of behavior. So we're talking more about neurobiology and how that gets laid down in the body and the emotionality that arises immediately when our needs aren't met, right? So this is habit. And what's essential is that spark of God that has come in, is embedded in the physicality of the flesh and illuminates us. Yet it's as though we're on two different channels. And in the bringing the larger awareness, the witnessing, this offers an overview where the two aspects of self can begin to recognize each other, and we have a kind of marriage, so to speak. In spirituality, if you ever hear the terminology turning to the beloved, right, this is the marriage between the ego and what's essential. The ego has laid down, surrendered to a higher cause. So it's not reacting from the infantile reactivity that God interfered with in the beginning of life. That's free will.
Right, right. And, you know, I experience this working with groups also. So whether teaching or working in organizations, you know, an organization can have its essential purpose, and it can veer away from that, and then you get all kinds of dysfunction from that. I mean, we can see it currently in our you know, the divide in our nation right now with conflict. But who are we really? And so how we're acting out and some of the things that are happening, and then our founding principles and who we really are, that's as a group, there is a chasm. Right. And so being aware of that actually makes you more patient about the acting out.
Right.
So, you know, in the past, I think we tried to use our heads to analyze, interpret, decide on a path forward, and fix things. And I think what you're saying to us is that you've got to let the head take a break and engage actually the body. And I think that's another revolutionary thing that I've learned from your approach is, you know, mind-body is something that we talk about, but I didn't know how to do it.
Right.
You know, I didn't know how to use the sensations in my body to actually give me clues to where my ego was running off with things, and how I could use that temperature reading to actually give me clues about what I needed to be paying attention to. So I don't know if I'm taking us off track, but
no, that's incredible. Right, because this is the missing piece, and a lot of people believe they are embodied and in body, and yet they're actually enacting a pattern and don't have the subtler discernment to know the difference. And that's where the mind then gets to really have a job, is working with that, you know, inner wisdom of discernment.
One of the tools in my toolkit that I had before I came to meet you was I was educated at a Jesuit school. Jesuits are an order of Catholic priests, and their founding father had something called the Spiritual Exercise of Ignatius Loyola, and they have a foundational kind of daily practice that they have that's called the Daily Examine, and so it was something along the lines of examine your day, 15 minutes at the beginning of the day, 15 minutes at the end of the day, and notice places where you experienced feelings of consolation, they would say, and feelings of desolation. So it was more, I was always thinking it was emotional, and that was always an effective tool for me to use. But what's so different is you're saying not just feelings, but if I were to look back on my day, it would be, when did I have a gut punch? When did I feel relaxed and at ease in my body? When did I feel braced and tense and clenching my jaw. And it aligns perfectly with that practice that I had, of using mind and feelings. And maybe I touched on the body as informing part of my look back at my day. But now it's much more intentional, and the saying that the body never lies. Your mind can tell you all kinds of things about what happened during the day and whether it was good or bad.
Right.
But listening to your body can sometimes give you a totally different read.
Right.
And I've learned from this process that it's more accurate.
Yes.
And the whole trick is discerning what's actually accurate.
That's
or true.
Yes. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you.
You share that in a way I just don't know how. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, the change for me has been that, you've been a teacher, but you left me with tools that I can integrate into my own practices,
right,
regardless of what my faith background is, regardless of how I use the work, whether I'm a therapist or I particularly work with groups a lot. But the tools are long-lasting. I needed your help at the beginning to understand how to use them.
Right.
And so that doesn't necessarily come through in the book because it does require sort of some facilitation and someone who's saying you're tricking yourself and you're
right,
going down that pathway, and that's, are you sure that's all that's here? I can remember you saying
right,
things like that. What else is here? But as you get oriented to this perspective, it opens up more and more opportunities for a broader view.
Yes.
And
yes.
yeah, I just can't say enough about how much more potential is present in this way of working than the way I was approaching things in the past.
Right.
It's outrageously different.
It is. Yeah, it's the difference between doing and being with. Yeah, and the mind can't do what source is. And that's a complex statement. Some people it will make a lot of sense, but the mind acts as though it's God. And there is something that's much deeper that we have to be willing to surrender to, that this mind just goes crazy over. And requires a lot of trust in oneself. So one of the real building blocks of this work is learning to trust ourselves.
Yes.
And this is what I'm hearing you've gotten tools, but then you go out into the world and practice in the environment that you're in, and you're learning to trust yourself.
It's been a slow process. It doesn't happen all at once.
No. It's a growth process.
But it's not just about trusting yourself. I would say the first step is recognizing there's a self present that I wasn't even paying attention to in the past.
Okay.
And then learning that that's a resource to me.
Right.
Not just my mind and my will. I can do it. I can work harder.
Yeah.
But that there's actually, if I, recognize that there's this kind of innate resilience that I have, I wasn't even tapping into it. And so I had to learn that was there, and then I learned to trust it. I had to learn to recognize it. So trusting myself to recognize it at first was, is this a look-alike? Is this the,
right,
it's a different way of interpreting what's happening. So if you're really processing your kind of inner world or watching yourself, you can convince yourself to go down one pathway with a behavior and interpret it in a certain way, and
right,
you gave me enough guidance that I would start to learn when I was going down a rabbit hole. But that doesn't come easily at the beginning. It's a new practice.
That is really a practice, and that's the value of working one-on-one or coming to classes. And I offer online classes for that, and I'm also in Olympia, Washington, and I have lots of classes here as well, and lots of others as yourself that work with people in the ways that you've learned. That's really beneficial. So, it's the gift that keeps giving. Once we really connect with what is essential and true, we just can't help ourselves. We want to share it with others. It's beyond us at that point. Yeah.
And I think what you offer is how to do that. We hear that a lot. Mm-hmm. You hear the words resilience. So, for instance, I used to work with judges, and they have an expectation that they will be objective and their demeanor will be without question, trustworthy for both sides.
Right.
So they actually have a professional code for that they have a certain kind of way of carrying themselves in the courtroom, that neutrality. And I thought, well, only certain people have that.
Right.
Who could sit in that role unless they have that innate calm and can be that patient in the middle of some of the things that happen, right?
Yeah.
And I've learned with this that actually you can develop that. I did not have that capacity to be poker-faced or neutral at all times. If something came up that was emotional for me, I would lose my ground sometimes.
Right. Especially in a professional setting.
Exactly. And
Yes.
I thought that it was just some people have that capacity and other people don't. And I have learned that I can develop that. And I think anyone can with these tools. It does take time, but...
and diligence.
It takes a lot of...
showing up to the practice.
But every time you have reactivity, there's an opportunity to look at what triggered that and sort of metabolize it in this work. And then the next time you run into that trigger or whatever it was that got you off balance, there's more awareness. And so over the years, I've completely improved my capacity to be neutral and, have professional demeanor even under a great deal of stress that in the past wasn't possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Oh my gosh. It's been wonderful having this conversation, and to be continued.
Thank you, Kim.